Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Indie Reads Aloud. Today, Edward Bentley, who is a Western Michigan author, is here to share his book, What a Way to Go, Death in Oshkosh in the 1800s. Before we get started, I want to make sure that those listening understand that there is a listening advisory today for this episode for language, violence, mature situation, and graphic descriptions of death. So if you have little ears who might be nearby, you might want to preview this edition before you let the little ones listen in. Welcome, Edward. I'm so glad that you could join the program tonight.
Thank you. This is going to be interesting.
I believe it will. Just reading a little bit about your book, I was very intrigued. How did you make the decision that you wanted to write this book about death?
Girlfriends have a way of influencing how you interpret newspapers, especially in the when you're looking at microfilm. I was researching an artist in the 1880s, and she was looking over my shoulder and looking at the rest of the microfilm that happened to be more intriguing in the way of reading. And eventually I was intrigued by what she was reading also. So I
Okay.
started.
So she had an
Yeah.
an interest in the macabre, and you kind of followed her down that rabbit hole.
That's eventually the way it became. Yes.
Okay, great. As I understand it, this book is a compilation of different newspaper articles from the late 1880s, correct?
1880s. Yes. All
Okay.
1880s.
So these are commentary articles about the passing of people and the manner in which they died, not necessarily their obituaries, correct?
Right. No obituaries. It is strictly articles, sadly, on their passing.
Okay. I'm really interested to hear. This is a very unique topic to compile into a book, and I'm really interested to see and hear what you have to present to our audience today. So when you are ready, please, sir, take the microphone and read aloud.
Okay, one little note, all these articles that are in the book, there's over 50 articles. There are no articles on automobile accidents. Ironically, there are no accidents regarding shootings, except for one child accident.
So no cars and no guns. That is interesting.
Yes, well, there's one with children, but that's interesting also.
Okay. And you're going to be reading 3 articles for us tonight, along
Yes,
with your introduction, correct?
I'm going to make a brief introduction,
Okay.
and then yes, I am going to read 3 articles.
Awesome. If you,
Uh,
whenever you're ready, please take the microphone and share your work with us.
okay, a brief introduction. In about the year 2000, I began research in the Oshkosh, Wisconsin newspaper, the Daily Northwestern, regarding a local artist, John Franklin Waldo, who lived there in the late 19th century. I noticed that, as mention was made almost weekly of the frightening loss of life and limb, the use of language enabled me to visualize much of the intense pain and suffering of the individuals involved in those events, and also of the friends and relatives surrounding them. My intention in assembling these life-ending stories, the ultimate in reality, is to share that fascination with and the appreciation for journalism in the 1880s. Poisoned in a mill, E.W. Davis scratches his hand and dies in consequence. During the latter part of last week, E.W. Davis, foreman of the Conley Lumber Company's lath mill, while working about the establishment, slightly scratched the fingers on one hand on a piece of lumber. The Sunday following, he noticed that the thumb was slightly swollen and the hand was stiff and sore. While waiting for dinner that day, the pain increased, and by the time the meal was ready, the hand had swollen so that Mr. Davis found he was unable to go to work. Since then, the difficulty increased in seriousness. First, the arm became terribly swollen, and then one of his lower limbs, until today, the entire system has become so badly affected that the doctor in attendance had given up patient hope for the patient's life. And it was expected this afternoon that he would not live 24 hours. It was believed that the piece of lumber upon Mr. Davis scratched his hand on must have introduced a deadly poison into his blood, and this had taken deep hold in the system before its presence became known by external symptoms. It is thought by some that the piece of timber was a piece of hemlock, and that this imparted the poison. Mr. Davis is a man well along in life and has a family. He is a brother of Mrs. O.C. Adams and has a brother residing a short distance out of the city. For a great many years, he has been an employee of Conley Lumber Company and has a long time had charge of the company's lath mill. During his sickness, he has been at his home, number 60 Walter Street. This afternoon, the unfortunate man did not recognize even his most intimate relatives. Later, at 2 o'clock this afternoon, since the above was in type, Mr. Davis breathed his last. He leaves a wife and 4 children. The funeral has not yet been fixed. Oshkosh Daily Northwestern, April 30th, 1885. The awful accident. Further details of the beheading of Adolf Nidolf. The boy trap has finally been remedied. The beheading of the poor boy, Adolf Nidolf, Friday afternoon at Main Street Bridge was one of the most horrible things that ever happened in this city. The spectacle was too horrible for description. The head did not appear to be cut off, but the neck seemed to be pulled out of the trunk, as the top would be pulled out of a decayed onion, disclosing a hole surrounded by crushed bones and torn and lacerated muscles. Mr. Powers, the sewing machine agent, stood within an arm's length of the boy, but on the opposite side of the trestle, and discovered him just as the draw was approaching the standard of the trestle. He had but an instant to think. He saw the boy's neck reaching around the corner of the iron-covered cord of the draw. He knew that a second more and that neck would be severed. Quickly, he reached around to the end of the standard with his left hand and attempted to push the boy's head down below the projecting end of the cord into the wider space below. But at that instant, his hand had struck the stand, and below Mr. Powers' hand went into the jam with the boy's body. The boy's body and Mr. Powers' hand were crowded into a space of less than 5 inches. There was not a lisp from the boy's lips, not a groan nor a moan, no sound save the dull crunching and crushing and grinding of human bones. Mr. Powers was held fast, and the draw had to be back up to free the body and Mr. Powers' hand. The wrist bones of the hand were badly crushed, and Mr. Powers will carry it in a sling for many days and will probably never recover the full use of the joint ever if none of the splintered bones will have to be taken out. A younger brother witnessed the beheading of the boy and started instantly for home as fast as he could run, nearly frightened out of his wits. A coroner's jury was soon summoned and an inquest held. The verdict was accidental death. Of course, no blame can be attached to the bridge tender. The body was subsequently removed to the home. of his parents, my apologies, of his parents on Siapi Street near the lake. It is stated by the neighbors that the family had moved to this city only 10 days ago. Alderman Wiesbrod, after consultation with the city authorities last Saturday, had the outer standards of the trestle work cut away so that now there is full 3 feet of space where there was before only about 5 inches. With this improvement, it will be impossible for another accident of this kind to happen. This is the fifth person who has been injured in the draw, and the second boy within the past 2 years who has been killed. Both of the fatal accidents happened in precisely the same manner. It would be no more than justice if the city paid all the expenses incident upon the funeral and burial of the boys' remains. Oshkosh Daily Northwestern, June 3rd, 1880. Carved to kill is what an unknown man did to himself Wednesday afternoon and succeeded in committing a most horrible suicide. Wednesday, the south side of the vicinity of Kansas Street was thrown into an excitement by the alarm that was given that an unknown man had been found dead in a pool of blood in a boarding house on 10th Street near the CNR WRR depot kept by Mr. F.W. Summerfield. The police hurried to the spot and found that the report was true, and that in the upper room lay a man stretched out upon the floor, on his back dead, with great and awful gashes in his arms, wrist, and neck, and the entire contents of his arteries poured out upon the floor in a great red sea. The body was not disturbed until Justice Reichman and a coroner's jury could be summoned, where an inquest was immediately held. From the testament of the witnesses and the appearances surrounding the suicide, the following particulars have been harvested. The dead man was a perfect stranger who came on board to Summerfield's about 2 weeks ago, paying his board 1 week in advance. He gave his name as Witeski and said he had just come down from the woods, but beyond this, nothing was known of him. He appeared to be suffering from spells of melancholy and talked to himself a great deal, occasionally saying something about the death of a little girl and that now he had nothing to live for. Wednesday morning, he was at breakfast, but after that, he was never seen alive. Mrs. Summerfield tried to get into his room to do the chamber work several times during that day, but the door was locked. Shortly before 6 o'clock, she asked her husband to go and see what the matter was. Finding the door still locked from the inside, he burst open the door when a horrible sight met his gaze. There lay the strange boarder, dead. He lay on his back with one arm stretched out and the other doubled over, while out under and about him was a scarlet pool of blood, some 6 feet square, thick and coagulated. Spurts of blood were seen around the room and across the bed and pillows to the wall beyond. Just back of his head lay an open jackknife covered with blood. Summerfield gave the alarm, which brought the police and the coroner's jury. On examination of the blood, it was found that the man had carved himself frightfully in his deadly work. Judging from the fact that he bled to death from the severing of the artery on his right arm below the elbow, this theory was at once formed. With the knife in his right hand, he had cut a gash around one side of his neck under the ear, had inflicted a cut in his left wrist, severing a tendons, and had slashed left arm just below the elbow. In none of these cuts had he severed an artery, and the bleeding from them seems to have been comparatively. Then, taking the knife in his left hand, he had cut a gash across the right arm just below the elbow, cutting clear to the bone, completely severing the radial artery. A spurt of blood diagonally across the bed, over the pillows, and over onto the wall beyond shows where he stood when he made the last carve. He undoubtedly then fell into about the position he lay when found, the knife falling above his head to the left side. Apparently, all the blood in his body had flowed out upon the floor. The jury, upon hearing all the evidence, returned a verdict of suicide while laboring under a fit of insanity. The body was turned over to the authorities and buried in the potter's field. In appearance, the deceased was a man about 40 years of age, medium height, smooth hair, smooth face, and dark hair. Oshkosh Daily Northwestern, May 5th, 1881. Those are my 3 articles that I was going to read.
Thank you very much for that super creepy reading. So we talked earlier about one of the reasons you wanted to compile these articles was to share your fascination with the journalism of the time. What in particular drew you to this topic of journalism rather than some other, aside from the fascination that your girlfriend extended to you? What was it that made you say, this is the journalism I want to focus on?
Well, if I can read my summary, which is basically from my introduction in the book,
Absolutely, go right ahead.
I think that would answer that. Although I'm honestly, to be sure to your question, I'm not sure myself.
Okay.
Let me read this and we can go on.
Okay.
My comment is, death is, well, inevitable, yet most of us will be fortunate enough to leave this earth in the company of those we love and cherish, and having made peace with our lives. There are those, however, who will leave under very undesirable, if not actually horrific ways. I only ask that we remember those souls briefly, and with me shake your head at the incredibly sad loss of life, see the horror associated with their demise, and find empathy for those left behind. Such a relief it is that our own future is hidden from us.
Very good. Um, as you were compiling these articles, was there a particular piece that really drew your attention? Is there one that kind of stood out to you, and why?
Um, well, I know I've talked to other people regarding my assembling this book, and they have used the word favorite, and I'm going to read one of my earlier comments to one of them, and I said, they made the inquiry about a favorite article, and I said favorite, and I said, these are all sad stories. They were all real people that died in unique and tragic ways. I think of if anything, it's the fascination of the writing style and how these stories were written, the use of language. That's my favorite thing about the book, that they were. That was my thought in putting all of this book together.
Okay, so it was the, I
If
mean,
you want,
it reads it, the 3 that you read sort of sounds like the crime blotter of today's newspapers.
well, the last gentleman I did talk to was he's actually a writer, and he's read most of the book before he interviewed me, and I asked him honestly, is there any of these that you could put in the book in the newspaper? And he said there's no way he could use any of them.
Right, because they are far too graphic for today's standards.
Yes, they
Yeah,
could not use any of them as they were written.
right, right.
Um, my
Yeah, but
favorite,
I do find it interesting that they thought it important enough at the time to share those gruesome details with their readership. Now,
yes,
maybe this is where we get the adage, if it bleeds, it leads.
yes,
I mean, it's such an interesting, as a past journalist myself, it's an interesting idea to see that at such a long time ago in our history, we were still then fascinated with this idea of, well, how did he die and what circumstances and what did the body look like, and that morbid curiosity
yes,
I find to be interesting when set in the context of the 1880s.
yes. The irony of this, I would say, the majority of these articles were found on page 4 in the newspaper. They were not on the front page.
Right. And yet
Yeah,
still included, which I find interesting.
yes, and yet they were page 4 articles. Yes.
And were these usually accompanying the obituary, the formal obituary, or were they just added as, I say, like the
No,
crime
these
blotter of the day?
these were articles, not obituaries. They
I
obituaries.
understand, but were they printed in the paper with the obituary or separate?
Oh, they were separate. That was an article.
Okay. Okay.
Yes.
Oh, I think it's very interesting, and I definitely know of at least one person I think who might have that shared sense of morbid curiosity. So I will definitely tell them about this book. I appreciate you coming on the program and sharing this and giving our listeners an opportunity to maybe investigate a piece of our history they didn't know about.
You have to read about the soap guy.
Okay, we'll put that on the list.
That is quote, yes. Yes, you could say he's my favorite. He's one of the saddest. I mean, they all are super sad, but he's one of the saddest.
Right.
Yes.
Before I let you go, do you have another book that you're working
No,
on for publication?
no, couldn't do another one. Uh,
Maybe something in a different genre, perhaps?
oh no, I was an editor for this book.
Okay.
It is available on Amazon.
Mm-hmm.
What a way to go! Death in Oshkosh in the 1880s.
Yep. And all of that information, the links to the book and all the other information is available on the show notes for this program. Thank you very much, Edward, for coming on the program, and I appreciate your time today.
I sure hope it's of interest. It is definitely one or two reads at a time. You cannot read it cover to cover. I can't even read it now cover to cover.
I understand. Thank you so much for joining the Indie Reads Aloud program.
Thank you. Very much appreciate it.